proposed zone change and the NB zone district, Mariani. And Adam, you're going to
Sure, yeah. What we have is a petition by Mariani Gardens, who is the only property in the NB zone, which is the nursery business zone, to essentially expand the uses in that district. At first, the first version of the petition contained very broad language that would have not necessarily required keeping the nursery business and could lead to the demolition of all the buildings on the property and establishment of new buildings. The planning board gave the applicant some feedback and felt that the law should be revised to specifically require retaining the nursery business and the nursery business zone. And then we came up with some language where we would give discretion to the town board for each use that would come other than a nursery business into the existing buildings. And there's an additional sentence in there that talks about some uses that have been determined to be compatible by statute. And there's a list in there, number 6, of what those uses are. So I would ask the town board to look at those uses and make the determination that they feel that those uses are compatible with the nursery business zone. And if there's any doubt as to whether that use would be compatible or not, to take it out of that list, because it would be incorporated then into the first portion where you look at it and then make that determination. Was that clear? There's a lot there.
You say compatible by statute with the statute.
The one that's in front of you. So let's read that language and go through it. So it says, at the discretion of the town board, other uses permissible in the SC or CB districts determined by the town board to be compatible with the on-site nursery use. Okay. That says any use that's permitted in our business districts essentially would be reviewed by the town board to determine whether or not it's compatible with the nursery business. But then that sentence goes on to state, on the condition that the on-site nursery use remains, with such other compatible uses to include, but not limited to. So these are uses that you're not really going to have that additional discretion. Already you're determining by statute to be compatible. And those are restaurants, spas, gourmet food markets, wine shops, art galleries, furniture stores, and other retail stores and shops. So my question is, do we want to have those uses in there? I enumerated them. Or just leave it that it will come in, you'll review it, you'll determine whether it's compatible or not.
What does other retail stores and shop? Anything else?
Yeah. Anything else?
So any other retail store would be basically allowed?
Yes. Yep.
What does nursery use remain? Does it have to be a certain part of the premises, a certain size, a certain dollar volume?
I think we need to discuss what that's going to be. And if there's going to be a percentage that you're going to allow to be converted of the existing buildings, or if that's going to be a discretionary item that the board's going to evaluate. My preference would be to have it defined somewhere.
As this is written, what type of uses do you envision we'd have to approve?
Well, it's going to be limited with all of these uses identified already. So if you want the ability to determine whether a restaurant is going to be compatible or not compatible, I would take that out and leave it to the first portion of the definition, where you review it, determine if that restaurant is going to be compatible with the nursery business zone or not. So what I'm envisioning, it might read, at the discretion of the town board, other uses permissible in the SC or CB districts determined by the town board to be compatible with the on-site nursery use on the condition that the on-site nursery remains. And that, that period. And then we could decide whether we want to additionally define what the condition that the on-site nursery use remains exactly means. By putting in a percentage, or some other criteria, or leaving it really with the discretion for you to review that. You know, that will give you more flexibility without being codified. To say, yeah, this is what we had in mind, it's okay.
Now, you already have a cafe there, and you also sell furniture.
Yes.
So you've already opened up that can of worms. Do you think they should be listed as approved uses?
Those two specifically?
It's already been done. It's also,
Certainly could. I mean, those two are already grandfathered in there. So but whatever we change here wouldn't affect what's operating there now, for sure. Yeah, if you're saying that you don't care what type of restaurant goes in there, then yeah, you can include that.
The existing zoning calls for not restaurants, but owner-run cafes.
Yes, and that language is supposed to be removed from condition or from number 3. So that would come out. Yeah. And they wouldn't be limited to that.
In their present approvals, aren't they limited to garden-type furniture?
I believe,
Wasn't there some, there had to be a nexus in the present approvals, which may
Can't
not.
find that.
No?
yeah, it is told the sale and display of nursery accessories, hand garden tools, garden ornaments and supplies. That is what they were limited to selling.
So garden supplies would be garden furniture, I guess?
Umbrellas
Yeah.
and tables, yeah.
Yeah.
But it did not necessarily mean, all types of furniture, which may not be inappropriate, but it's not part of the present definition.
Right, but that certainly would be covered under the revised one.
Right.
So this is saying the compatible uses are to include, but not limited to, meaning it could include restaurants, gourmet food markets, wine shop, art gallery, furniture store, and other retail.
Yeah, the way I read this is, those uses, you as the town board are saying are fine, compatible.
Like an art gallery or.
What, could you give me an example of what this would limit?
That's what's funny.
Let's say
It's fairly
Rite
comprehensive.
Aid wanted to come in,
Rite Aid?
like a drugstore or something.
Yeah.
How would that not be fall into the retail stores?
Well,
But
that's
that's
my
over to
concern.
5,000 square feet though.
Well, there is no 5,000 square foot limitation in this zone. Right, so in this zone, and I don't think you need it because you have that discretion. But it's, those other statements worry me as being too broad and
That's why
taking
it's-
away from your ability to say yes or no as to whether it's compatible with the NB district, right? That's my concern.
And
But
this-
those uses are compatible with the CB and SC district.
Clearly, those are allowed without restriction in the CB and the SC.
The CVNS and the SB, but not, there's no definition other than what we're trying to define as compatible with NB.
That's correct. Right, so the way we were.
So when I asked that you said compatible by statute, that's the statute we're creating, that's not a statute that we pull
No,
off
no,
the
no,
shelf.
yeah, sorry, it's what you're creating. Yes.
The other issue, well, I guess it will only apply to what special use permit, and they laid it out very clearly, which I'm aware they did in the formal business study, is special use permit allows you some control, but not legally if that use is permitted in that zone, and it requires a special use permit.
Yeah, but it's not apples to apples because there's very specific language in here that says at the discretion of the town board. So that gives you a lot more leverage over reviewing this. Absolutely, you have to justify why it wouldn't be compatible, but it's not like it's not exactly like saying, you know, multifamily residence is permitted by special permit. If you meet the criteria, you're allowed to do it. Here, there's additional language qualifying the use.
So every time a specific use was proposed, there'd have to be a public hearing for a special
The
use
way this is
permit
written, correct.
at the
The
town.
town board will review each use, determine whether it's compatible with the NB district, and then approve or deny a special use permit.
But if you define compatibility previously, then if for some reason the town board didn't want to allow the use, you legally couldn't, because you've already defined that as compatible.
That is my, that's why I'm bringing up that point. I'm concerned about that tail.
And as this is
wording of
written,
the tail.
I don't know if anybody here can come up with a business that,
And I don't, from my understanding, I don't think that was the intent of, I think the town board wanted the ability to review these uses and determine whether they're compatible or not.
but, so going back to it, can anybody come up with a business that would be restricted based on how this is written?
I think that the majority of businesses permitted in the SC zone, in the CB zone, the way it's written now, you're saying they're compatible.
Because they are allowed in the SC and CB, they're already.
Well, because it
no
says
matter business.
in other retail stores and shops, and it's really limiting your ability.
Which we have in our town, right.
Right, and if you took that language out, it'd be very clear that whatever use you're proposing in there that's permitted in the CB and SC, you're going to make that evaluation as whether it's compatible or not.
Okay, now, let me ask this again. There's a restaurant, somebody wants to open a restaurant there. We would be hard pressed as a town board to deny them to open a
That's
restaurant.
correct.
Based on the way it's written.
Yes.
Right.
Adam,
But you'd also be hard pressed to deny really a clothing store because of the way that last phrase is set up.
No, because yes, restaurants, because it specifically said restaurants.
Adam, based on the way this is written, aren't you really saying that it's the wrong zone? Because you're telling me it's a CB.
The way this is written, yes, it's essentially saying.
Why would you have a nursery zone when you're giving it all the advantages of a CB? Why not just make it a CB?
Unless you're going to require that the nursery remain in some specific, as a substantial element of the site.
Which is a requirement.
Right now,
Well, you know, I think of like a Home Depot. They have a large nursery center that sell lots of plants, but I don't consider that a
it's a
nursery.
nursery, right.
So you have the limit here. You need to decide whether it would be.
Yeah, and when you review, let's say Home Depot, you would take into consideration the percentage of the floor area that's devoted to nursery business. I think Home Depot would be hard pressed to convince the town that any typical Home Depot would be a nursery. even though it has
I think we're getting hard pressed to convince the town that Mariani's is a nursery.
Do they have any advantages?
Yeah, you don't have to have the requirement to keep the nursery. That's not an issue.
Is there any advantage to them being an NB as opposed to a CB?
Well, with the NB,
Other than what they could do without our approval?
the NB as it's written now requires a nursery to be there.
Right.
And allows them to have an accessory cafe and sell some limited retail goods that are associated with the nursery. The proposed changes would allow for additional uses in the existing structures while keeping the nursery business. The other end of the spectrum is to potentially rezone that property to CB, and then there wouldn't necessarily be the requirement to preserve the nursery business.
They haven't asked for that.
They haven't asked that, no.
We need to study this a little more. I don't have an opinion on this at this point.
Well, I think the way this is written,
I don't like the way it's written.
kind of says the same thing I think that you just said, John. It almost says the same thing. If it was CB, or this doesn't restrict really any use, because if we can't come up with a use that this restricts, it's CB.
See, maybe it's not right.
Well, except the nursery wouldn't be permitted in the CD.
Yeah, that's,
Right, nurseries and
Well, that's the
nurseries.
one distinction.
yeah.
I don't want to have to
exactly.
close his nursery business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his livelihood.
But you would still sell plants.
It's up to
another
him to
business
decide
We
that.
just discussed.
I don't think it would allow every element though of what's there.
Right.
The
Right.
outdoor
Right.
storage of materials, the truck storage,
Yeah.
so it's certain.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
that could all,
I mean, I guess the point I want to make is if the town board wants to keep it in B and wants to retain the nursery business and have the ability to say yes or no to specific uses in terms of its compatibility with the nursery business, I think there just needs to be some change to the language in the tail end of that section. Okay? If the town board wants a different approach, then we can talk about other ways of what should happen to that property. You know, whether it should be CV or we don't necessarily want to retain the nursery. Yeah, so I'm looking for how you want to regulate the uses. And get you to a place where how you're regulating is what you want to regulate.
So right now, he's saying nursery business, but he wants the accessory use also to allow what's allowed in the CB district.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't
Yes.
propose.
I don't think that's so
discuss- well, I
drastically
wouldn't
off of where
propose
we should be.
discussing. I mean, I totally take your point, Howard, but until he comes forward and
Yeah.
asks to be rezoned, clearly there's a reason he didn't do that. I'm not sure what it is, but,
Well, I think it's probably the elements of the existing.
Nursery.
Sure,
Yeah.
he's running a business.
Well, I clearly think you have to take the examples out, because if you have those in, then it really,
We have no say.
you have no say.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it scares me that every single use that comes in, the town board has to be
Yeah,
the
that's-
decision maker on it.
Kinda hard.
I mean, you need to be fair and consistent. I'm not sure you do it based on that criteria.
Well, we already have in the CB zone what we allow in CB and what we don't. We're restrictive in that. Of what we
Right,
allow in
there's certain
CB.
uses, yeah.
Right, that we allow in CB, that we don't allow, that we felt was compatible for the, for our town. And
Yeah.
that's gone
Well,
on
the-
forever.
the-
So what he's asking for is nursery business with the allowed uses in the CB, if I'm understanding correctly.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right, and the concern the planning board had was, well, a pizzeria in there necessarily to the planning board wasn't consistent or compatible with a nursery business.
But if it was like Terry Lodge or Portchester, I'd like that.
Well, that's why.
That's really a
we wrote
high
it this
step
way.
one.
And I agree, and I think that's why we wrote it here, because there is, I think, a concept that's happening at Mariani.
Mhm.
It's hard to define, right?
It's very upscale.
Exactly, exactly, and that's why we wrote it this way, so you have the ability to say, yeah, that's exactly, we understand your concept, and this use would fit in with that concept,
Mhm.
and we're gonna say yes, but, I couldn't think of a way to regulate it other than
But do
giving
we
you the
do that to
discretion.
people on Main Street, saying if you're gonna open a pizza, you better make sure it's really high class or
No, but that's in,
upscale?
that's in a
That's a
commercial
C-
zone.
I know, but can we really determine, what is our determination if you're good enough? You know, it's very today or tomorrow or yesterday.
And you're asking us to make that
Yeah,
decision.
and how are we gonna judge, oh, I promise, it's gonna look great, you just gotta, you allow it or you don't, it's a
And I think
CB, it's
that's-
a CB.
Right, and that's how we ended up with the
Yeah.
original language in there.
The thing that determines it is the rent he charges. If he's charging $10 a square foot, he's not gonna get good. If he's charging a good rent, he's gonna read out and get some good tenants in it. I think they're gonna make enough business to support that rent. It's a free market
Yeah.
situation, really.
And that's how we got to the original condition number 3. You know, it was a nursery business, we allowed an accessory cafe and some retail sales, and that's how the town dealt with it. So, yeah, you can have a little bit extra, other than your traditional nursery uses. And, obviously that passed, and that's what was established there. Now that you're looking to expand it, that's the question. Do you allow other uses in there, and how do you regulate it, and when does it veer too far past NMB to be reasonable?
Okay.
Roland, is it standard operating procedure for the town board to have sole discretion over what stores or retail establishments come into a,
Yeah, this is unusual.
This
That's
is very
fine.
unique.
Yeah, this is a way to try to keep the nursery, allow some expansion of uses, and give the town some control over what goes into that nursery business. This is not typical.
I think that's why he said nursery business with allowed uses in CB, because it was coming into more the conformity of what it's actually been.
I think part of what everyone's struggling with is that such a unique property has been created there that we all kind of want to protect it, but the reality is it may not always be owned by Mark Mariani, and you have to be careful about what you want to see on that corner.
Well, that's a critical point that you make, because anytime we're looking at zoning and zoning changes, you can't just do it based on the current owner. And he's done a wonderful job. We'll all agree that it's just beautiful what he's turned that property into. I spent a lot of money doing it. But who's to say that that property could be owned by somebody differently? And if you don't define even nursery business, it could be one bin in the corner, and it could be a pretty large major retailer. And if it's not restricted by zoning, not his fault. He sold the property to somebody else, or even a third of it down the road. And those are things you have to consider when you're considering any of the zoning.
But it still kind of falls into the free market theory, because what he paid for it and what he's going to have to sell for if he ever does, that person that comes in is going to have to charge a hefty rent, and that sort of brings in a caliber of tenants that, you know, I think we would be pleased with. If they're not going to give it away for free, they have to carry their note and everything else. And the better we make our town, the better, you know, we get our tenants coming in that, you know, the sidewalks or Main Street, we're trying to fix up other areas, the better the caliber of the tenants that come in. So I think that helps us always be strong in that area, because then we can encourage the best tenants to come into our town. We're providing the sidewalks and the lighting and the, you know, a walkable community and all that. I think it helps us. Okay, I think we got a pretty good handle on this.
Well,
But you can say.
I mean, for today. Just for today. I don't know how much further.
Adjourn, Diane?
I don't know how much further you want to go today. We have all the information in front of us now.
I have a question about the public hearing part of it. If there were multiple uses within what's currently business, would they all require a decision?
sure.
Yes, the theory is they can be broken up into individual shops.
Yeah. I envision, I think he was envisioning having multiple tenants in there.
So does that mean for any different type of use within there that he's sub-leasing space, it would be considered separately?
Yes.
As currently thought out,
Yeah, I mean, we can pick some uses, like restaurant, and put it in there, so we don't have, if he wants to put a restaurant, we have to have a public hearing for it. But I think the catch-all provision of,
No, you would have to have a public hearing, but the compatibility issue would have been addressed.
oh, okay, but, you know, that all of the other, the last line of other retail stores and shops, I think there's too much of a catch-all there.
I agree.
So
I think if you're gonna go through the trouble of issuing a special use permit,
Mm-hmm.
and you would want the ability to evaluate the use that's being proposed.
Well, how do we get to the point where we wouldn't have to have a public hearing on every?
You could not make it a special permit, and you could just list uses that are permitted as of right. And it would just go through the normal site plan change of use review.
Public hearings are very cumbersome every time it feels different
Alright.
tenants coming and going. It's like, don't you think it would be,
Lease the space.
it would take up half our town board meeting times for the year, right?
Yep.
Okay, I mean, you agree with me, Roland, right? Okay. And we have to try to simplify this in some way and make it work for the residents, for businesses.
Should we try to get together and think of what our related uses, and maybe then come back with the applicant and discuss it with them?
I think that's I don't want to be in a position having to pick each tenant,
No.
and you're okay, you're not okay.
Yeah.
I think it puts us in, I think we might agree, Roland, and legally,
very subjective, it would be very subjective.
We don't want any CPA firms.
absolutely not.
Thanks. If it's Chase, yeah. That's Bedford.
Just make sure I thought. It would be helpful, I don't know if the applicants want to provide this, if there are prospective tenants that we know what those uses are. I mean, we already know he's got a food establishment there, so restaurants seem like an easy transition. He sells furniture and garden supplies and things like that, so that's an easy transition. The normal process, without any of this going on, the normal zoning is he'd come to the town, almost like the animal hospital did, and said, here's a use that you don't allow right now, can we have the use? And they would issue a special use permit, correct?
The way it's drafted?
Yeah, without this, just the way, if he came to us and said, I'm not looking for any of this, but I have this certain tenant, a furniture store that wants to move in.
The way it exists, the language looks at?
Yeah,
No, he would be able to do that.
you wouldn't even be able to get the special use permit to do that, okay.
No, it's not permitted use.
Okay. So, well, I think yours is a good point, if we sit down and if we had some input from the applicant, he may not be willing to give it to us because he may want to have more, as much latitude as he can. But if he did have
Yeah.
pending prospective tenants, that would certainly help us a little bit.
Well, I almost think you've answered your question here. You know, you don't necessarily want a special use permit, and you're not all that concerned about the uses, that type of uses that go in there, and that you're fine potentially with
Certain uses.
certain uses in the SC and the CB district.
You said we're not concerned about certain uses that go in there. I'm not
Right.
sure that's correct. We're certainly
Wait.
concerned about,
There were certain uses we're not concerned about.
The board,
Right.
not.
yeah, the existing uses.
Okay,
Does
well,
it
besides
start?
the existing uses, I was getting the impression that the board didn't want to review whether they were compatible or not, and that there was some, it seemed like some consensus that any use that's allowed in the CB or FC is compatible. It wouldn't
No.
be an issue.
No.
No, I wouldn't say that.
No, there were certain, I think certain uses.
Okay.
Let's use restaurant as an example, I don't know if we all agree on it. But
Okay.
it's a, we agree that restaurant, that could be in the law. That we wouldn't have, if they want to put a restaurant, we wouldn't have to review that. Or
As a permitted.
as a permitted use.
Well, I mean, looking at some of these other ones, I'm saying art gallery, gee, that would look great in there. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, then we're going to picking and choosing again. An art gallery would be really good. I think if someone had an antique store, I think that with all the beautiful windows, I think that would be wonderful. We don't have any antique stores in town, that would be really nice. So we're sort of picking and choosing a little here again, but.
Well,
Well,
yeah, I mean,
it's
the
not,
way we
that's not
approach it,
precisely, I mean, we're trying to figure out a way that's kind of more streamlined, that we don't, and in my mind, the last thing we want is to have to,
Public hearing.
have a public hearing every time this guy,
the
gets a new
issue,
tenant.
you know, this would be much simpler if the applicant knew what business he wanted to put in there, and then we could just determine whether or not he wanted to make that a permitted use. So we're trying to accommodate them, and the way we attempted to accommodate them is have you review the use.
But that's the
I
normal
mean, we're not,
process.
there's no way we're going to be able to think of and write in the law all the potential uses that may be compatible there.
Well, and the applicant's attorney made that point.
Yeah, and I think it's valid.
Town board.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're trying to find that balance of, you said it last year, John, you know, it's, and the applicant has said it, is, it would be much easier if you had a potential tenant or tenants and said, hey, I'd like to get whatever zoning change we need to have these, and then we approve it
We
at
could.
that point. But it's also, it restricts the owner a little bit in attracting certain tenants because he's not sure what is allowed there. So we're trying to strike that balance in between. But, you know, going back to zoning, general zoning, we have to always be careful of any decisions we make, not just how it impacts the town now, but how it could impact the town in 5 or 10 years. And there, as you mentioned before, Diane, very, you know, I agree with 100%. We have to make sure that we don't hurt the existing business owners in town and the existing property owners in town. I think you said it perfectly. We have to consider that when we're looking at changes like this.
And I'm not looking to play competition wars, you know, I'm not saying we have 2 pizzerias and another one can't open, I'm not saying that, you know.
No, but you said before that
Because it's-
we have to make sure that we don't hurt existing business owners and existing property owners because they've made an investment in town. And that's why you have zoning set up the way it is, so people know what the situation is when they move into any town or they invest in a certain town. Here, we got to strike this balance where got a property owner who made a major investment in our town, and he did a wonderful job of it, but how do we make sure that we balance it so we're not hurting part of the town and by helping this one particular, how do we find that balance? And I think by trying to strike an agreement of, here are some compatible uses that make sense. We've already listed a couple that just make common sense. How much do we expand that? But, and I agree with Steve, the 5 words of other retail stores and shops, we can't answer the question of what this restricts. If it doesn't, then that's an issue. Because if Rite Aid or Walgreens came in, I'm sure that's probably not what we want to see going in here, whether we have formula businesses or
Well,
not.
maybe then the direction we should go in is eliminating the special use requirement and identifying which uses everyone is comfortable with permitting as of right in there. And I would couple that with also putting a very clear limitation, requirement on how much of the nursery needs to remain. And that might cover it to your satisfaction.
But I think we just mentioned this, and I'm not sure what the appropriate legal way to do it, whether it's the town attorney talking to their counsel. But if they won't give us feedback, hey, here's a real strong prospective tenant, and it's a little outside of what you're thinking you're going to restrict me to, we might want to consider that. That way it helps him.
At the time they were before the planning board, they were asked that question and they didn't have anything to offer.
Right.
I don't know if that's changed now.
It's worth the question, I think. And I don't know legally if it's
Or
a supervisor.
maybe if there's something outside of the permitted uses, they still could come back and say, is there a process for a special use?
No, they always could.
Yeah, it always come back.
Yeah.
No.
Well, that would be a use,
Yeah.
that would be difficult.
Right.
Okay, that's-
Because you can't
If it's out, it's
just
out.
ask for a special permit. It has to be
A permitted use.
a permitted use.
Yeah.
Identified as a special permit.
It's virtually impossible to think of everything that might walk in the door.
No, but are we
It's like
saying
what
Well,
they
it
said
sounds
years
like-
ago, there weren't cell phones, or there wasn't,
Yeah.
But it
You know,
sounds like
it's-
where
it
you're
can't
all,
go that way.
you're all comfortable, it sounds, with the expansion of the cafe and home furnishing type additions, like the antique store or an art gallery or furniture store. It sounds like where you're
well,
focusing.
there's most of the
It's those
stores on
types
Main
of-
Street, I wouldn't object to, like a little gift shop is nice, or, I mean, what we have in town, I think all our businesses are lovely. I don't think those type of uses would not be appropriate there. So it's sort of what's in our CB district kind of falls okay for me. I mean, we've already pushed out the type of businesses that aren't allowed in the CB.
Well, like we used to have, I don't think it's there anymore, L'Identière.
It was wonderful.
Would that be, just by an example, would that be the type of
Yeah, I think
use
it's-
that,
They mostly sold chandeliers, and
So-
it's wonderful.
so there's an example of something that you might all agree would be compatible with a high-end nursery.
Don't you think that's
Right.
already there?
But you're not going to have the ability,
There, not chandeliers,
Yeah,
but
but a
the
lot of
gift
that, yeah,
aspect
sure.
of
but,
it.
okay, but if you permit retail, you're not going to have the ability to say,
What type of reason?
right, it could be a dollar store. You're
Right.
not going to have.
But it's the rent that determines the dollar store.
Well,
But
maybe
you
that's,
don't have, that's all you can get.
But, I think that's the.
No,
But
I
that could happen
understand.
on Main Street. I mean, we
understand, but
hope
what
we
we're
provide
saying is-
enough of a quality of
Right.
the town
Yeah, but my
to
point
keep the
is,
scale up.
yeah, and that's valid, and that may be the direction the planning board, the town board wants to go. But the way, the premise from this is that this is not Main Street, this is a nursery business zone. And you'll have to differentiate the two. And maybe that is the ultimate thinking, that, well, you're gonna treat this the same as a retail.
Well, I think we could speak to the owner and their lawyers and see, we're coming up with some side suggestions here, and how do they feel with what we're coming up with? They may say, I have a simple solution for you, is this. So let's talk to them and say, because they're the ones that own the property, and they want to work with us to make this happen easily.
I have a question for Ron. There's, I think, 14,000 feet with that one building. What if they got a tenant that was more than 5,000 square feet? Would they be subject to the because
Unless you
it's
added
not-
that, unless you
that's
added
all.
that in here as a special use permit. So now you're permitting, if we go this route, certain uses, right, without the special permit, okay? You could also put in an additional use. Any use over 5,000 must come in, and I would suggest that
Yeah, certainly would seem logical.
for a
But-
special permit.
Like we said before, is if it is over 5,000 and it meets all the criteria, then there's no reason not to issue a special use permit. That's the whole
Correct.
reason why it's set up.
Correct.
Right? So
But
to
still
John's
gives,
point,
but still gives you a look at it.
yeah, and to John's point, if it's not, but it's defined, we don't have to issue a special use permit because the use is already defined. And that eliminates that extra step for the applicant and us. The thing, again, not to harp on the zoning piece a lot, but we have to be careful about even talking about the economics of it. And I appreciate what you're saying is, it's a lovely property and we hope it maintains that high level, but we see what's going on around us. We can't ignore what's going on around us, and you probably know as
Just
well as
like
I do in
the hotel,
commercial
yeah.
real estate.
There's
You know,
nothing we can stop.
properties don't necessarily sell for what they maybe had been worth years ago, and what's happening in our market especially is those values are coming down, sell prices are coming down, that's pushing market rates down, rental rates down, and that affects the future tenants as well. So we have to be careful about those assumptions that we might make and stick to some of the realities of current ownership and future ownership and what we really want there. You know, what kind of uses we want there. So I think it'll be a good exercise to work through what we think we're all comfortable with. If we can get some feedback from the applicant, great. If we can't, we can't. And then hopefully we got into an agreement.
Yeah. Well, I think we've used up our time. We're almost to the end of it. And I think this first work session has been very productive, and I'm looking forward to accomplishing a lot more in the future. So thank you guys for showing up, and thank you, the audience, for listening and being so polite. And we'll see you next Friday.